Okay, we are recording, and we're going to start on, let's see, what was it? Page 70?
Yeah.
Yes, page 70. I think where we left off. So go to page 70. Página 70, I think, for Vaughn. And does anybody have anything they want to talk about before we jump in? Anything that you've been processing over the week from last week that didn't get tied off?
What did you say, Dave, by the way? ¿Cuánto?
Página 70.
70, sí. Yes, wow.
Page 70.
Che. In Peruvian, che, que che. Que che. Means I understand. Que che.
Okay.
Sí, que che. Yeah. Sorry, you started it.
Hey, Dave.
Yes.
Quick question.
Sure.
We have the large print edition to help us.
Different page numbers, right?
Yeah, but just give us an idea because we've missed so much.
Okay.
Are you on chapter 6, necessary suffering?
No, we're on chapter 5, but just at the very end of chapter 5. So go to chapter 6, just go back a couple of pages.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Got it.
And I'll give you the first sentence of what we're going to do so you can catch up to us. So.
Okay.
So yeah, we've been stumbling over the stumbling stone. That's what we've been doing lately. And we're still, he is still introducing the second half of life as being a life of necessary suffering, the tragic sense of life, that life is going to present these stumbling stones to us, these incidents, these moments in our lives that we can't fix or control, and that just basically flatten us against a brick wall and force us, if we, it's kind of like, this is your mission, should you decide to accept it, to look at life in a different way, to be able to completely make that 180-degree shift that Jesus is always working to give us and be able to process in a different way. So these stumbling stones are what he's been talking about. Where we left off last week, he was talking about, first of all, fairy tales, Cinderella and so on and so forth, those that point to who we are inside, but we don't realize it yet. We don't realize our own lineage, we don't realize who we are, and that this process and suffering is tied into it, and these stumbling stones are tied into it, help us to break down the exterior that we have built up in our core beliefs and so on and so forth, so that we can see who and what is really inside. Then he talked about Francis of Assisi and his kissing of the leper as being the possibly metaphorical story that is about this moment of epiphany for Francis as well. That the thing that repulsed him, the thing that nauseated him, the thing that was so fearful to him, when he embraced it, either literally or figuratively, things began to change in his life. And there's really a series of 3 of these epiphanies, just as there were with Thomas Merton, kind of interesting. I picked up this theme on Sunday, as you probably remember, with the Ugly Duckling, but also ended with Thomas Merton's epiphany at the corner of 4th and Walnut in Louisville. Another one of these unmasking moments where everything kind of breaks through. And so he's talking about these kind of breakthroughs. And so that kind of catches you up, hopefully, for Beth and Brady, since I know you missed a bit of it, but this is the bent that he's on, okay?
Yeah.
All right, so let's start on page 70 or wherever it is on the large print edition, but it's, I can only think of the many men and women. Are you seeing that paragraph?
Yep,
okay.
Got it, thank you.
All right, here we go. I can only think of the many men and women I met during my 14 years as a jail chaplain here in New Mexico. No one taught them the necessary impulse control and delay of gratification, which is the job of a good parent. With poor identity, weak boundaries, or little inherent sense of their dignity, they allowed themselves to be destroyed and to destroy others by drugs, promiscuity, addictive relationships, alcohol, violence, or abuse. Then the enforced and cruel order of the jail was supposed to serve as their reparenting course. But now the lesson was so much harder to learn because of all the inner scarring and resentments toward all authority and toward themselves. If you do not do the task of the first half of life well, you have almost no ability to rise up from the stumbling stone. You just stay down and defeated, or you waste your time kicking against the goad. There's been nothing to defeat your infantile grandiosity, as Dr. Robert Moore wisely calls it. In much of urban and Western civilization today, with no proper tragic sense of life, we try to believe that it is all upward and onward and by ourselves. It works for so few, and it cannot serve us well in the long run because it's not true. It is an inherently win-lose game, and more people find themselves on the losing side. If the gospel is indeed gospel, good news, then it has to be win-win and a giant victory for both God and us. You remember when I was having this good news kind of, I don't know if you call it a debate, but it was a back and forth online because I had one of my messages posted that was talking about the good news, and someone was coming back and doing the devil's advocate thing. And finally he said, oh, good grief, you can't have the good news without the bad news. And my reply was, the good news is there is no bad news. And it just has to be that way. And it's kind of what he's saying. It has to be a win-win situation. It can't be a win-lose. We have to graduate from the zero-sum kind of mentality that we normally have and naturally have in life, because life looks zero-sum in terms of finite resources and physical resources. But in God's economy, of course, it's very different. And so this idea that what we would want to believe is that it's all upward and onward, that there is no reverse. There's no reverses, there's no descent, there's no stumbling block. The tragedies of life are evil. They need to be prayed away. They are either God's punishment or it's man's disobedience, rather than understanding that even though we're not going to go looking for them and try to create them in our lives, as Christians have also mistakenly done, when they do arrive in life, they are teachers, and they're ways for us to be able to learn. It's funny, I was just talking to someone, one of the counseling sessions before I went on here, and she was talking about a coworker that is just making her life miserable. And we talked about this. Can you see that coworker as your teacher? Can you see that coworker as the, I didn't use this word because it wouldn't have meant anything, but the goad that Rohr is talking about, that Paul talks about, as the one who, because they are being difficult and really unfair, is teaching you how you can overcome these type of situations, how you can move in such a way that you can maximize relationship as much as you can. And I think this is the sense that we can start to see life if we're willing to change the perspective. And this is what I believe Rohr is talking about. And of course, it's what all wisdom teachers eventually end up talking about. Any comments along those lines?
I have a quick comment, maybe about.
Sure.
Okay, in the paragraph, if you do not do the task of the first half of life well, you have almost no ability to rise up from the stumbling stone. What about those? I mean, I understand what he's saying, but what about those people who have no choice? I mean, they can't do it because they're born in such horrendous circumstances that they can't. Does that make sense?
Yeah, yeah.
If you do not do, well, yes, I get that, but a lot of people can't.
I know it sounds like he's making it sounds kind of like a moral imperative,
Yeah.
but I think he's talking about it more in just a pragmatic sort of way. I mean, if the first half of life does not get done, for whatever reason it doesn't get done, and it can be exactly what you're talking about, Beth. Some people really are raised by wolves, and they don't have the kind of family of origin. They don't have the kind of reinforcement. They don't have any of the acceptance that allows them to build that strong container in a healthy way, that ego in a healthy way. And it's not their fault.
Right.
You know, it could possibly be argued that it's none of our fault if the first half of life doesn't get done well, because we don't know what we're doing. We're mostly reactive at early ages. And so we're reacting to what's been being dished out at the time. But if it doesn't get done, then that is going to be where you pick up the ball later on in life, whenever you start your spiritual journey. One of the things that has been very clear to us at the Effect as a recovery community, especially initially, is that people were going to come to us everywhere above and below just the water line. You know, if you kind of look at the water line as just being the kind of the neutral point, where at least you can regulate your emotions well enough to be able to be in the present and make decisions that really include the people around you, that we're going to have people that are really at a deficit, especially those who are active alcoholics and addicts. And our job is to get them up to the water line. And then there are people that are going to come in at the water line, and we can start working with them to move above it, and wherever they happen to be, to meet them where they are. But some of the work that needs to be done in terms of spiritual formation has to start below the water line. And we have to get people just up to the point where, I guess Rohr would say, that enough of the first half of life work has been done so that they can even embark on, what's to follow. So at some point, it does need to be done in order for us to be able to follow along the path, because we have to have a certain level of ability. But it's really sad when it's later on in life and that work has not been done, because you're kind of at a deficit.
Yeah. Thank you.
Yeah.
It's helpful.
Anything else? Okay. Almost all of us end up being casualties of this constantly recurring Greek hubris. And remember, he defined hubris as a refusal to be humbled by what is humbling in your life. So these stumbling stones that come up and hit you in the face, and if that still refuses, if you still can find a way to refuse to be humbled and still carry on with your illusions about yourself and so on and so forth, okay, that would be what hubris is, according to Rohr. So almost all of us end up being casualties of this constantly recurring Greek hubris, the refusal to let these teachers do what they are supposed to do in our lives. Some even appear to make it to the top, but there is usually little recognition of the many shoulders they stood on to move there, the many gratuitous circumstances that made it possible for them to arrive there, and sometimes the necks they have stood on to stay there. Some who get to the top have the savvy to recognize that there is nothing up there that lasts or satisfies. Far too many just stay at the bottom of their own lives and try to overcompensate in all kinds of futile and self-defeating ways. I love what he's saying here in this paragraph. And by the way, that was a great, well-written sentence. Didn't you like that one? Let's see. Some even appear to make it to the top, but there's usually little recognition of the many shoulders they stood on to move there, the many gratuitous circumstances that made it possible for them to arrive there, and sometimes the necks they have stood on to stay there. That's a great line. But I love what he's saying here. And it occurred to me, more and more what we're seeing, especially online, are these self-help gurus, the ones that either in finance or in spirituality or in multi-level marketing or in some way have made it to the top. They've made a lot of money, and now they're going to tell you exactly how to do it, right? And they're going to make more money because they're going to ask you to pay them to tell you how to do it. And the hook is always, I did it, so you can do it too. I only have to work 4 hours a week anymore, and I make $100,000 a month, and you can do it too. But if you really think about it, their ability and what they were able to do had so many random bits that allowed it to happen in their life that are not reproducible in a book or a seminar or a session in any way. And even if you did everything right, you might not be able to reproduce what happened with them. And it's kind of, that's what he's talking about here. They make it to the top, but they are not recognizing, either to themselves or to others, all of the things that happened, all the people in their lives that came across that helped them, all the circumstances that just kind of unfolded the correct way that allowed them to do what they did. And we can't reproduce that at will. There is no formula for that. And so we, results may vary in very small print here, but I think it's even more than that. It's recognizing that we are still being humbled even as we are working toward the goal that we're working toward, if we're really paying attention. And so it's a different kind of experience, at least from a second half point of view. He goes on. I'm sure many slaveholders in the South were self-made men, and perhaps never in their entire lives had to face a situation where they did not succeed. Such a refusal to fall kept them from awareness, empathy, and even basic human compassion. The price they paid for such succeeding was an inability to allow, join, or even enjoy the general dance, quote unquote. They gained the whole world, but lost their soul, as Jesus put it. They did their survival dance, but they never got to the sacred dance, which by necessity includes everybody else. If it is a sacred dance, it is always the general dance too. Now, are you at all familiar with the general dance? This is another Thomas Merton. Are you familiar with it?
No.
Okay, let me read from you from the New Seeds of Contemplation so you can have a sense of what Rohr is talking about here. Can you all see that screen, except for probably Vaughn?
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Yes.
Okay, this is just a little clip from the New Seeds of Contemplation. What is serious to men is often very trivial in the sight of God. What is in God might appear to us as play. What in God might appear to us as play is perhaps what he himself takes most seriously. At any rate, the Lord plays and diverts himself in the garden of his creation. And if we could let go of our own obsession with what we think is the meaning of it all, we might be able to hear his call and follow him in his mysterious cosmic dance. We do not have to go very far to catch echoes of that game and of that dancing. When we are alone on a starlit night, when by chance we see the migrating birds in autumn descending on a grove of junipers to rest and eat, when we see children in a moment when they are really children, when we know love in our own hearts, or when, like the Japanese poet Basho, we hear an old frog land in a quiet pond with a solitary splash. At such times, the awakening, the turning inside out of all values, the newness, the emptiness and the purity of vision that make themselves evident, provide a glimpse of the cosmic dance. For the world and time are the dance of the Lord in emptiness. The silence of the spheres is the music of a wedding feast. The more we persist in misunderstanding the phenomena of life, the more we analyze them out into strange finalities and complex purposes of our own, the more we involve ourselves in sadness, absurdity, and despair. But it does not matter much, because no despair of ours can alter the reality of things or stain the joy of the cosmic dance, which is always there. Indeed, we are in the midst of it, and it is in the midst of us, for it beats in our very blood, whether we want it to or not. Yet the fact remains that we are invited to forget ourselves on purpose, cast our awful solemnity to the winds, and join in the general dance. So I think you can see what he's pointing to here. He's pointing to a complete shift in our values that occurs in the transition from the first to the second half of life. So as Rohr is talking about these people who make it to the top and they learn to do their survival dance, but they never learn to do the general dance, this is what he's referring to here. Mm. This ability to immerse ourselves and to see in the insignificant things, the significance. That first line there, what is serious to men is often very trivial in the sight of God. And what in God might appear to us as play is perhaps what he takes most seriously. It's, again, that 180-degree shift. And so even as we continue to do our survival dance, and even as we continue to do the work that we have learned to do or trained to do, that we get paid to do, that we need to do as responsible people, at the same time, we got to see, as Rohr calls it, the task within the task, which is being part of the general dance, the cosmic dance, rather than just the survival dance. And this is all what the stumbling blocks can lay bare for us, because they come in and they strip everything away that we thought was important by giving us a glimpse of something so much more profound. And, you know, I can't help but keep coming back to Nina, you know, how this is changing, profoundly changing the way that she works and how she works, and you know, what she sees as important. And she's still trying to do her work and her job, but she's got to be seeing it with different eyes. And, you know, maybe Brady, you could, and you too, Beth, both of you have gone through things that I would assume have pulled the veil away in a lot of ways. Is that something that you can even speak on a little bit?
It certainly is true.
Yeah.
It's true for me, and it's true in terms of what I've discovered in reading the narratives of other people who've gone through similar experiences. It's frequently just referred to as a perspective, change of perspective. But it's hard to describe, but essentially when you pull the veil away, you realize that most of what we think matters doesn't matter. Vast majority of what we think matters does not matter. And what matters is simple and very difficult. It's about relationships. It's about compassion. It's about a sense of equity that you just see. You see it everywhere. One example, and this is just my anecdote. When we were in London, I told Beth there was a day where we were around a lot of people, and I said, it's kind of strange, but I don't see any strangers. Everybody looks familiar. Like they were all friends, or at least friendlies. And so one's concerned about those things that we're mostly concerned about, especially in that first half of life, the things I used to be concerned about: reputation, power, wealth, appearance, status, and all the things that support that in terms of finances and opportunities and all of that. It just kind of fades away. It's there, it's a thing, but it fades away as something that intrudes into your happiness or your peace of mind.
Well said. I like that. Anything to add, Beth?
I think, I was probably caught up in a bit of that, not as much as Brady. But when you lose all your material possessions, your life changes big time, and your perspective changes. And I went through the same kind of thing that Brady's talking about, but in a different way. You know, his was through illness. Mine is too, but it was that initial loss of everything. You know, walking into a Holiday Inn with nothing but the clothes on her back. Your perspective changes really fast, and you become extremely humbled and extremely, I think, at one with the world, kind of. I don't know if that's saying exactly what I want to say, but, you know, certainly identifying with the majority of people in the world who don't have anything. And it's like, oh, you know, it will take you to a level that you've never been before, at least for me. And even though I so am much better, I would never give it up. Like Brady would never give his up. through all the hell really at the time that you go through, but I wouldn't give it up because I've reached a new level. And there's still suffering. You know, the cycle. I think Richard Rohr's meditation, maybe it was the last 3 days on the cycle of suffering. It's like you get through it. There's some suffering and it's like, oh boy, phew, I made it through that one. This is good. New perspective. And it's like, dang, it comes again. And it's like, wait a minute. So, you know, then you realize, okay, there's wisdom here. I need to learn from this. So the perspective changes and not getting angry with the whole thing. And I'm probably talking too much, but you learn to see the wisdom in the suffering, which I did not do before. Yeah. And I don't know that you can do for me, in my opinion, without going through intense suffering, you know, whatever that might be. Okay, thank you. I'm done.
No, well said. And you know, let's be honest. It's going to be pretty hard to see the wisdom in the stumbling stone while you're stumbling over it. It's always going to be in retrospect as you grow through it, as you live through it, as you keep breathing, you know, and then you're going to be able to see. And then you can actually be grateful for it, even though you never want to go through it again. I mean, who does? And you wouldn't wish it on your worst enemy, and yet you can still be grateful for it at the same time. Rohr puts it really well. He says there's two paths to God, if you will. There are two paths in this spiritual journey, and one is great love, and the other is great suffering.
Yeah.
And both of them, because both of them break down the ego, both of them break down the illusion of what we think we are and what life is all about, and nothing else in the world does it like that. Great love and great suffering both have that ability to crack through. And if you give yourself over to great love, then you're opening yourself up to great suffering. And there's no other way around that. You know, you put your heart that far out of your body. There was a poet who said that. Having children is walking around with your heart outside your body. I always loved that line, you know, and you're going to get hurt. I mean, there's no way that you're not. And that's going to teach you as well. But you won't reap the benefits while you're going through it. It's in surviving it, it's in the moving through it that you realize, you know. So we're grabbing some of the most obvious things. I mean, the life-threatening health issues you've faced, and of course I think of Danielle along the same lines here. Do you want to throw in here, Danielle, with your experience? And you don't have to if you don't want to, but
come on, we did.
You know, I hear you. I hear what it's supposed to be about, but I got to tell you, I don't have gratitude for this cancer journey that I went through. I don't have, you know, and the depression that I struggle with, I don't, is it causing me to grow? I'm growing because there's nowhere else to go. There's death or there's growth. You know, you could get so, you know, become a victim and get so boggled down with it, or you have to move forward. It's like life says, you just have to keep putting one foot in front of the other. But to look back and say, I have gratitude. I've heard that in cancer groups that I've attended where people are so grateful for their cancer journey. And I'm sorry, I'm not the poster child for cancer or the cancer journey. I'm just not there. Is that a mark of my lack of spirituality because I wasn't able to find the jewel in all of that? I don't know, could be, I don't know. I got to stay out of judgment, but yeah. So I don't know if that's what you were looking for, but that's the truth of how I experience.
And that's what we were looking for, the truth. How do you really feel? That's perfect, Danielle. No, it doesn't have a bad mark against you for your spiritual journey. You could be the exception proving the rule, or we just need to check back with you in 4 or 5 years and see if that greater perspective has given you some other perspective. But everybody's going to have a different take on things. But
yeah.
we could certainly... Go
I think
ahead.
there's also a take on that, Danielle, and that is, I'll share from my own experience. In the course of my life, up until the last 15, 20 years, I never felt close to God. I never wanted to be close to God unless there was a really difficult time. And then when things are really difficult, then, I'm on my knees and I'm there, but I'm doing petitionary prayers and I'm asking for things. And there was a time, especially through the first cancer, I remember saying to Beth, I said, I almost miss the difficult times because that's when I felt closest to God. And so for me, the first jewel wasn't some kind of perspective change at the end of the process. It was a time of deep emptiness and ambiguity and absolute uncertainty and feeling so incredibly dependent on God. And it was painful, but I appreciated it, benefited from it.
Danielle, you're growing though. You're still putting one foot in front of the other. You're showing up. I mean, that's huge.
Yeah, and I gotta tell you, I hear what you're saying, Brady, but I gave up being a petitioner of God probably, I left the church in 2010, 11, maybe even before that. And, but I really stopped the petition thing because I didn't see God as someone who grants us things and then sometimes doesn't. And I couldn't wrap my head around that kind of spirituality. I will pray for people who ask me to pray for them out of respect and hope for on their behalf. But when I was going through cancer, I can't say that I was praying for healing, though I know a lot of people around me were praying for healing. And I didn't sit there as a victim saying, God, why did you let this happen to me? I went through all the cancer woes, and the emotional roller coaster of cancer. But I don't. So when you say, Brady, that you felt that you almost missed those times of utter dependence, I don't know if, and perhaps this is my own self-preservation, but it's this acknowledgement that God is with me on some level, whether I feel him, her, or not, every step along the way. Do I feel a dependence on God to get me through it? I just trust that I'll have the strength day to day to get through what I'm going through. Is that I think God shows up in so many different ways through supportive doctors and supportive shrinks and supportive support groups and different things that I relied on during that time. But, so I guess I hear you, I resonate in a different way. I think I get the essence of what you're saying, but the verbiage has just really shifted for me, in terms of being petitionary with God and stuff. Yeah. It's just changed. And I have to look at that and say, and challenge myself to differentiate between whether that's true spiritual growth or cognitive dissonance and disappointment.
Right.
So that's always in the forefront and what I'm constantly challenging myself around.
Mm-hmm. Doug Bowers tells a great story about a friend of his who was at a prayer breakfast, and he had a young man with him who was from Kenya, someplace, who as a child had his family destroyed, the whole village destroyed, and had to walk miles and miles and miles to find safety. And so anyway, they were at this prayer breakfast. And at the beginning of the breakfast, everybody was saying prayers, and they were all petitionary prayers. People were asking for help find a job, or help a son or daughter-in-law, or it's just all petitionary prayers. And during the course of it, Doug's friend noticed that this young African started looking up and looking at people and kind of looked bewildered. And so later, this friend asked the young man, what's going on? And the young man said to Doug's friend, he says, "You pray funny." And he says, "How do you mean?" He says, "Well, you ask for things. You ask for money, and you ask for health, and on and on." And so Doug's friend said, "Well, how do you pray?" He said, "Well, we thank God for his blessings and his presence, and we ask for courage to see us through the difficult times." And I just love that prayer.
Yeah. Yeah. Nice.
That's it. That's the crux of it, I believe. Absolutely. Yeah. And maybe,
I don't know if you guys, sorry.
Go ahead.
Just one quick thought on that story. This was, I don't know if you guys remember the story of the lost boys in Africa that walked thousands of miles because their families were wiped out, and they all decided to just start walking. This is one of those kids that Doug's friend, who was an HR director at a big hotel here, hired a bunch of these boys. And that's the boy that he was talking about. So he was part of the lost boys in Africa that were eventually brought over to the United, well, many were brought to the United States. So just an add-on.
Wow.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I do want to clear up, Danielle, when I say that we can be grateful for a stumbling block, a seminal event in our past, a painful event, doesn't mean that for me, from my point of view, it doesn't mean I have any real warm and fuzzy feelings about it, no real affection for it. It's just, I'm grateful that there was some event in my life that got me asking the better questions of life. It's more like that. And so, I don't want just the word gratitude to paint some sort of rosy emotional picture that, at least in my case, doesn't exist. But everybody's going to have a different take on it and a different feeling toward it at the same time.
Yeah.
But,
But do you understand what I was saying as far as the cognitive dissonance versus spiritual growth and constant, reevaluating that?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And imagine those people trapped in like faith healing, believing churches that they're put on as being non-faithful if they're not being healed from their cancer or from their whatever. It's insanity. The insanity of that is beyond me. So people walk away from the church for many things, but that sense in which God heals me because I have enough faith, or he doesn't heal me if I don't have faith, in order to drive me toward greater faith. I think that defeats the very thing Dave's talking about, the second half of life. It defeats the ability to say, as you said, just accept what's happening is what's happening. For whatever reason may be beyond you, but the fact is you'll do the best you can, which which will be true no matter what you have. But I've been through this because divorce is like death. I've died at least 4 times. So I've been through the process of realizing different things. And I've went through sometimes with people who encouraged me to be more faithful, prayerful, must be something in your past. Went through this whole sense of, I did, if you would, 4th step with a friend and tried to see if anything I've done and made apologies for people. It's like God will then certainly bless and break this bad relationship and make it better. Didn't work, but it was the idea. So the cult becomes very clear then. So I appreciate what you're saying, Daniel. It defeats exactly what Dave's talking about. It can defeat the very process of discovering what we're supposed to be looking at in the second half of life.
Mm-hmm.
But just one quick thing about cancer, because this is one thing that helped me. Everyone has cancer. You're born with cancer. And these little metastases floating around that your body's fighting. And for those of us who manifest it in some form, tumor or some other form of the cancer, something happened, or for whatever reasons, many times not known, your body ceased to fight it successfully, and it took hold. That kind of helped me because I realized, oh, okay, I'm not separate from all of us. I'm just like everybody. Anyway.
Yeah, you didn't get cancer because you didn't do something. You didn't eat right. You didn't exercise. Blah, 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 blah.
You know, it's funny, Vaughn was bringing up the churches that have faith healing at their core, and our church was like that. It had that same thing. And I can even be grateful for being in that church because it forced me to really look at that issue a lot earlier than I think I probably would have otherwise, and really face it down. You know, so much, I go back to my journals, and so much of his question, what is prayer all about? How does this prayer work? How does intercessory prayer help? I mean, God needs more people talking before he can hear us. I mean, all these questions went through my mind, you know, and so, but it forced me to come up with a paradigm that allowed me to be able to understand prayer enough that I could enter into it and not feel always like I was on the outside looking in. So even those sort of circumstances that were adversarial at the time or really dissonant at the time, kind of what you're talking about, Danielle, I can look back and say how they also formed me and helped me to the extent that I was willing to stay on the fire and push through it and not just turn tail and run like I'd always done in the past. So this is another thing, another way of us looking at the stumbling block, looking at these circumstances and situations. How are they going to form us if we let them? So, well, we got a little bit more time. Let's dive into chapter 6. We can say we made some tracks here. So he's going to continue this whole thread, and now he's going to talk about necessary suffering. And he starts off with a couple of quotes from the Gospels, and well-known quotes. Anyone who wants to save his life must lose it. Anyone who loses her life will find it. What gain is there if you win the whole world and lose your very self? What can you offer in exchange for your own life? Matthew 16. And then from Luke 14, if anyone comes to me and does not hate his father and mother, his wife and children, his brothers and sisters, yes, even his own life, he cannot be my disciple. And so we've got these two strident examples in Jesus. And you have to imagine how this would have just slapped his first listeners right in the face. You know, we don't have the sense of family as the be all and end all, tantamount to survival, that it was for them in that first century culture in subsistence societies. And then the idea of losing your life to save your life is the same thing. So they've lost their impact for us 2,000 years later, and in a society that is so different. But if we will let them, they come right back to the core of things, and they're forcing us to take a look at life in a different way, if we will let them, right? So Carl Jung said that so much unnecessary suffering comes into the world because people will not accept the legitimate suffering that comes from being human. In fact, he said neurotic behavior is usually the result of refusing that legitimate suffering. Ironically, this refusal of the necessary pain of being human brings to the person 10 times more suffering in the long run. It is no surprise that the first and always unwelcome message in male initiation rites is that life is hard. We really are our own worst enemy when we deny this. So this is right on point. I wanted to just show you all 1 Corinthians 10:13. You probably have heard the saying and seen it on bumper stickers, God won't give us any more than we can handle. Yeah?
Yeah.
You all familiar with that one?
Yeah.
That one used to drive me crazy back in the day when I was at this church. You know, God won't give me any more than I can handle. So what is God doing? Am I like a lab rat in a little maze? That's how I pictured myself. And God is saying, okay, let's see how much. We're going to get him right up to the line, but we're not going to go over the line. We're just going to keep pouring it on. And it's like, what kind of God is that, you know? It's like me when I was a kid with a magnifying glass and the ants, you know, it's like, is that really what's going on here? Well, you aren't going to find that saying, that line anywhere in scripture because it doesn't exist. But what it probably refers to is 1 Corinthians 10:13. So if you can see that, no temptation has overtaken you that is not common to man. God is faithful, and he will not let you be tempted beyond your ability, but with the temptation, he will also provide the way of escape that you may be able to endure it. Now, why this popped into my head with what he's saying from Carl Jung, that so much unnecessary suffering comes into the world because people will not accept the legitimate suffering that comes from being human. That's exactly what Paul is saying here. No temptation has overtaken you that is not common to man. I mean, because we're here breathing, we're going to have to face trials and tribulations. And temptation also sounds like a moral issue. That's not what the word primarily means. It's a trial or a test. That is the primary understanding of it. It's like you've got, I don't know, 15-pound test line, right? For your fishing line. It's always some pound test. Well, what does that mean? Well, that means it was pulled until it broke. And then they said, okay, this is how many pounds it tested out. That's the idea of a temptation here. There's no test.
Just say F.
There's no stumbling block. There is no, tragic sense of life that is overtaking you that's not common to man. In other words, God doesn't give you this stuff. God isn't giving us what we need to overcome. It's just what happens because we're here breathing. And that is such a different thing, because if we see God as the actor for these difficult things in our lives, he's giving me this to test me. He's giving this to grow me, to chastise me, to punish me, which is the way that we look at these things from that literal point of view. Then God is the actor there. And it's one thing not to get the parking space you want, but what if your child dies? I mean, we've got to realize here that whatever paradigm that we select has to work for all of life, not only the slices that we're looking at the moment. It's got to deal with everything that's going to come down the pike. And of course, we don't even know what's coming down the pike. So it's going to work as long as it works, and then it doesn't work anymore when another tragedy hits us and really knocks us on our butts. And then we're going to have to come up with something else that describes the faith walk in broad enough terms that it encompasses what we're now experiencing. But no temptation is overtaking you that's not common to man. God is faithful. That means God is always with us, always walking with us, and he will not let us be tested beyond our ability. Why? Because with the test, he will also provide the way of escape that you may be able to endure it. So in the moment that you're getting the tragedy that hits you, if you don't, when you put your hand on a hot stove, you pull it away. If you allow yourself to stay in that moment, not to run from it, not to avoid it, not to stuff it, but to actually press into it and get to the other side, that's akin to letting the paradox remain unresolved long enough that we press through it. Then the way of escape is there, because God is present in the tragedy as well, in the stumbling block as well. The way of escape is in the stumbling block as well.
I have a little story about a most unusual angel that I think that I can relate to in regards to this. Sorry about going back to cancer again, but it was early on in the treatment. In fact, I think it was the first time that Beth and I went to MD Anderson, and I was getting ready for x-rays. And so they were calling people in small groups. And so there were 3 of us that were called in to go in and take our shirts on and put on a little gown and get ready for x-ray. So the 3 of us are in this little dressing room. And there's this one guy, kind of a biker dude, old, crusty. And I'm getting ready. And here I am in my cancer experience, early on in my cancer experience. And I've just been told recently that I have this very unusual, very rare cancer, hard to treat, blah, blah, blah. And this guy looks at me and goes, "What are you here for?" And I said, "I've got cancer." And he goes, uses the F word. He goes, "F word. We all got cancer." and I smiled. And it's like, okay, it's not just me. It's like, we can handle this. It was an incredible blessing. And he was my angel that day.
It was
Angel with an F-bomb.
Yeah, dropped an F-bomb.
He dropped a big F-bomb.
We all got cancer.
Yeah, we all got cancer.
An angel with a potty mouth. Yeah. That's
Yep. And tats. Lots of tats.
Yeah, it's funny. that sounds a lot like my epiphany when I started working in recovery, and all of a sudden just hit me. We're all recovering from something, you know? Here I think I'm coming in to treat these addicts and alcoholics thinking that I have something that they don't have, or that they have something that I don't have. And she's like, no, I just have a different way of dealing with my unfinished business. But the dynamic is exactly the same. And so that was, it had the same kind of effect, I think, that you're talking about, where I felt part of the group again and not outside looking in. So interesting.
And Dave, don't they at times tell you things, suggest things to you that makes you reflect and learn from their experience? Yes, of course, because their therapy goes both ways. It's not a one-way street, in my experience, and others I've been with. So
very true, man. Oh, he's giving us a map of Chile now. You're really gonna keep putting your finger on that, aren't you, there, buddy? That's okay.
I'm going to sell you on some travel. Come on down.
All right.
Like it. Montevideo's right there. Buenos Aires right. Come on down. I'll meet you up Valparaiso when you come down for the cruise. Come on down. Have a group rate. Come on down. We'll all meet down here. Come on down.
Okay.
Sorry.
Yeah.
I'm sorry. What are you gonna say, Jerry?
I'm struggling a little bit here.
Go for it.
I'm gonna take a risk. We're talking about suffering and gratitude, and I went through a period in 2008. It started, and I didn't know it at the time, but I had a very serious lung disease and got pneumonia in 10 years. I was hospitalized 10 times in 1 year. The majority of the time I was alone. I was living in North Carolina. I had moved down to North Carolina to a cabin on a lake, my dream cabin. And my husband left me in the middle of it. And the thing about having pneumonia and having a lung disease, it's very different than saying I have cancer. Everybody surrounds you when you have cancer. But when you say you have a lung disease and, you're getting hospitalized, and I almost died in 2009, so I had double pneumonia. And so I was sitting here just trying to think through, what, and it lasted for 5 years. I still have it, but it's a lot better. So I was sitting here trying to think, do I have gratitude? Do I have pity? Do I have, I ended up losing my home. I couldn't work. So I'm sitting here just struggling with, was that my suffering? Was that my upward? Eventually I did move back to California and got heavily back into Al-Anon and heavily back into, that's when I'm real close to when I joined the effect. And I was just sitting here, I'm not sure how I feel about it. I'm not sure if I feel any gratitude or I feel any spiritual awakening, or, I did know that God was with me, even though I was alone the majority of the time. I had to take care of myself the majority of the time. It was definitely a time where I had to rely on God completely. I went back to that. You can't fix it. You can't control it. You can't, whatever. And so I definitely had to spend a lot of time with God. And I did read the Bible and I did read my Al-Anon. And I'm not someone that reaches out and tells people that I'm sick, which is I think a character defect. So I'm struggling with, I just want to throw it out just because I need to say it out loud. I don't know where I am with that. I don't know if that was my upward, life is better. Life did get better. Life did turn around. Knock on wood, I haven't had pneumonia for a year, but I still get it. I do different things for myself. I take better care of myself. I know that. But like Danielle said, I don't think I can find any gratitude for it right now. because I lost everything. I mean, I couldn't work. I lost my career. I lost my dream home, and it was lonely. And my husband left me because he didn't want to take care of me. And so I have a lot of bitterness toward it. I have a lot of anger toward it. And I don't know how to heal it. I'm not, maybe this is what this book is all about for me, is I just realized that tonight, that maybe that's what this book is about. And listening to you all is for me to heal from that and to see the other side of it. Because it did bring me to California, and it did bring me friends, and it brought me the church, and it brought me my meetings, and you know, my home in California. And so there was another side to it, and I can see that, but I'm not clear why. I mean, I was really, really, really sick. I mean, I went to a doctor when I was sick, and then 2-3 weeks later, when I was doing better, she didn't even recognize me, because that's how sick I would look. And to be hospitalized 10 times in 1 year is quite a bit. And almost die. You know, they thought I had tuberculosis and isolated me. So anyway, all that detail is not worth it. So I'm struggling with it. It's definitely something I'm struggling with. I don't know why it happened. I don't know, what I need to learn from it. I don't know how to find the gratitude. I don't know how to see past it, because I still carry this disease, but it's much better. And I learned to take care. Maybe that was it. I learned to take care of myself. I've learned to stop. When I have a cold, I stop. I don't, I wear masks. The COVID petrified me. And the hard part is, unlike cancer, people understand cancer. People, surround you when you say cancer, but people don't surround you when you say pneumonia and lung disease, so I didn't get the support that I would have liked to have had. Mm. But I did have God, and I do know I had found God before this all happened. And I did have God, and I did feel the presence, and I did pray and ask God for the courage and the will to keep going and keep moving and keep, So anyway, I'm taking a risk, just throwing that out there, because it's one of those things I don't talk about much. So anyway, I just wanted to throw that out. Thank you for listening.
Well, thank you for taking the risk. Absolutely.
I like what you were saying there, Jerry. In fact, I was thinking, about some of the stuff that I've been through, and I wonder, I don't know if I have these moments of clarity. Like, stuff happens, it sucks. I handle it. I don't know if I get some great lesson or some flash of wisdom or whatever. It's just, I don't know what to, I've even been in car accidents and things where I came out of it, relatively unscathed or whatever, and was kind of upset at myself that this didn't change me in some meaningful way. It's just something that happened. And I don't know if I'm, using Enneagram language, being a type 9 kind of person who just kind of, and I struggle with this idea whether or not I'm in the first 40 versus the first half versus the second half as well. And what, are we supposed to have this insight? And, I sense that the insight doesn't have to be accompanied by happiness, or like you said earlier, Dave, it doesn't have to have this soft, fuzzy kind of flavor to it. But a lot of times I feel like I don't have the insight. I didn't get the prize that this suffering was supposed to deliver to me. Yeah.
Well, let's do this as we're wrapping up. Make a couple of stipulations. The first stipulation I'm thinking we need to make is that any feeling of gratitude for these sufferings is optional. Okay. It's not required. It's not a litmus test for you having gotten the prize that you feel any sort of gratitude at all. If you do, great. And maybe you will at some point, you know. And I think the second stipulation is that it doesn't all happen in a single event. Like you had the accident, William. You know, it's not that it's all going to come together. The way I look at it more as is that really deep suffering or certain events in our lives can become hinge events. It's like your life is going on this way, and then suddenly this thing happens and you're diverted. And if you allow yourself to be diverted, you find yourself asking different questions and following different sets of links, you know, in life that take you to a very different place. And sometimes it's just a very small difference at the beginning that becomes this huge distance at the end after you travel down far enough on the path. And so you may not realize, you know, especially if, I mean, you know, Danielle is still, she's still, it's the gift that keeps on giving to Danielle, right? You know, because it's not like it was an event that's over. You know, it's caused a cascade, a domino effect of different events that she's still processing constantly. So I don't think you're really through it yet, Danielle. And Jerry, it can be the same thing for you, and William, possibly for you as well. But my point is that if you allow this thing in your life to cause you to start asking different questions, to processing things differently, to consider that maybe what you thought was important before is not as important as you thought it was, and you switch your priorities. Maybe it's not even a conscious thing, it just sort of happens to you. Because I can't say all of this was conscious to me 30 years ago. I just started doing it. I mean, I felt like I needed to, and it led in a direction that I can now say has been significant. So I guess, you know, with that said, maybe that can take some of the pressure off of some of the verbiage we've been using here, or this book may be using, that is maybe feeling like you're not doing it right. I mean, take that off the table, and just, I mean, good Lord, I've known Danielle, Jerry, and William long enough to have seen the journey that you guys have been taking. And I know that it's significant. And I know, you know, that circumstances have served up, you know, very different lives for the three of you. I mean, Danielle, you were in San Diego when I first met you, and now you're there with a whole different experience, a whole different population around you. Jerry, same thing, East Coast to West Coast, and all the different experience. And William, same thing. You've been all over everywhere anyway, William, so you're always changing your environment. But think about that and how different the experience is because of what you went through and all the things that you went through that have so altered your life direction. I think it's more like that, you know, but that's the best I can do to put words on it. And you guys are gonna have to figure out the rest. But let's take some of that off the table, you know, and then maybe that'll help us. Okay. I've been at the end, Frank. So can you be brief?
No, I was listening to this book, Michael Singer's Living Untethered, and it's really interesting. He's saying how everything's energy, you know, and he's saying, you know, how, you know, what we need to do is, you know, live in the moment and realize that, you know, when we give things a place in our brain, you know, and how he was talking about how the brain works as well. He says, what we're doing is we're storing these energies that are not meant to be stored in our brains. And so what ends up happening is, you know, that energy, that's what it is. It's energy, and it has to go somewhere. And so when we start holding it there, then we start making judgments. We start thinking like what William was just saying right now, like, well, gee, what was I supposed to do with that? And maybe what all you were supposed to do is experience that moment and then just let it go on through instead of holding on to it. And so I'm still trying to process this book, but it's very fascinating to think of, though, these things that happen to us are things that we observe as just energy and nothing more. And we can just observe it and then let it go. It won't have effects on us anymore. We won't do things to, you know, feel like we have to fix it, whether or trying to cling on to somebody, because like he was talking about, oh gee, if I could just get this, if I could just have this marriage, or if I can just get this person, or if I could just get that job. He says what we're doing is that energy that was stored in us, it has no place to go, so it keeps the cycle going in the brain. And if you could just learn to let it go, now you'll ask better questions, like what you were saying, Dave. I just want happiness. How do I become a more joyful person? And so we look bigger picture than trying to just focus on a little thing that can only just fix the need right then and there, because you're always going to want more. It's not going to be enough. And he says if you can realize all it is energy, and don't hold on to it, it's easier to let go. That's just kind of something as we were talking, I thought, well, is there a tie in there?
Sounds like there
love
is.
it.
Very
I
cool.
love it.
Yeah.
That's good. Yeah. Was it a life? What was the name of it, Frank?
The book is called Living Untethered by Michael Singer.
I just bought it as you were talking there, Frank. I love that guy.
You sold a book, Frank. Keep it up. All right. Okay, we got to bring it to a close. We're over time, but great ending to this conversation. Thanks everyone for throwing in that way. And even though they were very quiet, I do want to recognize that Marion and Ellen and Randy joined us. So I don't want you guys to go unacknowledged and all of that. So great to have you guys with us. Okay, where did he go? There he is. Scott, give us a prayer home, buddy.
Father God, we're so grateful to be here, as we express every time we set aside time to meet with you. We'll listen to these stories and these experiences that your children go through, and I'm moved to just pray for each person. Lord, I know the challenges I've faced in my life, and I know the only way I get through them is to believe in your promises, believe in the truth that sets me free from the lies and the distortions of the enemy. God, help us to understand what to do with these things we're reading and learning and interacting with. Help us to be better people and leave people better than we found them. We thank you. We pray this all in Jesus' holy name. Amen.
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 Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.
Keep coming back, Julie. All right, everybody. Sunday.
Bye, guys.
Sunday,
Bye,
Sunday.
everybody.
Bye.
Night, guys.
Bye.
Don't forget Easter Island's close by. Come on down, see Easter Island. Good night, y'all.
Good night. Bye, Jerry.
Bye, Jerry.
Good to have you, dear.
Bye.
Okay, and Jordana and Linda too.
Well, I won't see you on Sunday because Ron's having his
That's
surgery
right.
tomorrow.
Okay.
So I will see you next Tuesday, next Wednesday, next Sunday. You should be there next week, just not this weekend, but I'll be streaming on Sunday.
Perfect.
So
All
just
right,
to let you know.
We'll see you on the little screen.
Okay.
Okay.
Bye, you guys.
Bye, Linda.
Bye.